Hello, and welcome to the Capital Gains Show. My name is Aaron. In this show, I defend capitalism and criticize socialism. And in this video, I want to do a book review. The book that I'd like to review is called Pictures of the Socialistic Future by Eugene Richter. Translation by Henry Wright. Foreword by Brian Kaplan. This book is available for free on the Mises.org website. I will be providing a link to this book in the description of the video down below. This book was written in 1893 by a German liberal. It's a pretty brief read, only 142 pages, so it's not a slog by any means. It is a work of fiction that describes a socialist revolution in Europe. At first, the protagonists in the book are elated at the increased prosperity that they believe is sure to come following the revolution. But slowly they begin to realize that only misery is being produced by the new socialist society. Now, keep in mind, this book was written in 1893, before the Russian Revolution, and before socialism had really taken hold in most other countries. So it was written by Eugene, and he basically he very accurately predicted in his work of fiction what socialism would bring. And later on, as time went on, the historical record pretty much proved him right. So let me give you a brief overview of the story. A revolution happens in Europe, and pretty much all the European countries are transformed into socialist societies with socialist economies. The only exception being England and across the pond, the USA. The book mentions those two countries as still being capitalistic. So the book opens up with describing a family that is very happy. They're big supporters of socialism. They're really glad that the revolution succeeded, and they're anticipating things like a bigger house, easier jobs, better food, less toil, more leisure, and an overall massive increase in the quality of life. As the book unfolds, the exact opposite proves to be what they receive. The book really describes a lot of things that you see that you saw happen in the historical record in the 20th century, even though the book was written in the 19th century. In the book, all foreign debt is canceled. Maybe that's not so bad of a thing, but everyone's personal bank deposits are confiscated, and everyone gets really mad about that. Then in the book, the family that anticipates being moved into a larger house, instead they get moved into a smaller house, and most of their furniture gets confiscated. Everyone gets assigned a job, whether they want one or not. Labor becomes a duty and an obligation, and if you don't labor, then you go to jail. And then the Socialistic Party then has meals served communally. Privately prepared meals in homes are discouraged and limited. At first, the family's really excited to, have a communal meal system, and they're looking forward to it. And then they discover that the food quality is really poor, and the food content and quantity is also, substandard. They realize that the food is worse than it used to be back when they were making it at home. All the children are taken to be raised in state-run orphanages. Well, not orphanages, but state-run group homes, and everyone is liberated from having to raise their own kids. Of course, the family ends up just missing the children and wishing that they were still raising the children rather than have them in a group home. One of the younger children in the family ends up sadly dying of illness in the group home. It causes a major blow to the mental well-being of the family, as you can imagine. Immigration, as in people leaving the country, that becomes banned for everyone who's not too old to work. Only old people end up being allowed to leave. Labor becomes a duty, and as part of that duty, it's interpreted that immigration to other countries is prohibited. So the only people of working age that are able to leave do so under the cover of darkness and do so illegally. When the book opens up, first everyone predicts that there's going to be socialist harmony between all the countries. It ends up the opposite becomes the case. Foreign relations deteriorate rapidly. The inferiority of internationally traded goods increases. So every country gets mad at the other one for trying to trade with them, crappy quality widgets. It causes a big increase in friction, between the countries politically. So as a result, they predicted that there would be peace and there would be no more need for armies. Instead, they end up having to double the size of their army and station all the troops on the borders, in anticipation of some kind of, outbreak of hostilities. Workers start to say that the work was better before the revolution, life was better before the revolution. Eventually, a large strike ensues. The strike causes a huge drop in output, so then rations have to be cut. Meat ends up being eliminated from the diet. Bread and vegetables get severely restricted. It ends up just being a total disaster all around. And it's funny because even though it's a work of fiction, a lot of these things you see parallels in the historical record after all these, socialist revolutions happened later on in the 20th century. And now I want to read just one brief paragraph, one brief passage from the book. I think it's really interesting. What the protagonist is talking about the culture and work ethic in the workshops after the socialist revolution. And this is what the book says. Diligence and zeal are looked upon as stupidity and perversity. And indeed, why should one be industrious? The most diligent comes off no better than the laziest. No one is any longer the forger of the links of his own happiness, but others forge the links which shall fetter you just as it pleases them. So Eugene, the author, really accurately predicts the reduction in productivity per capita, right? In the historical record in the 20th century, most of the socialist enterprises were known for producing inferior products, producing a smaller quantity of products, and having a lazy workforce. One of the famous jokes in the USSR was the workers would say, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. So you can see that Eugene is accurately predicting what ends up coming to pass in the 20th century after this book was published. Towards the end of the book, a counter-revolution occurs and, war breaks out and all these crazy things happen. It ends up just being a disaster all around. But there's a funny part towards the end of the book. One person manages to get out of the socialist country and hitches a ride illegally on a boat to the USA. And then that person reports that he gets a really good job working at some capitalist firm and ends up getting a pay raise and getting promoted and things like that. So the only bright ray of sunshine in the book comes from the story of some guy who ran off, to go work under a capitalist mode of production instead. Anyway, at 142 pages, it's pretty concise. It's fairly brief. The chapters are not too long, but there's a lot of information packed into the book regardless. It's a fun, brisk read. It's a page turner. Despite the book being, 130 years old, it feels very relevant and timely. And it feels like, to me, this book gives a fair warning to us today, because there's a big push among the youth in the Western world today for socialism, and I think they're severely mistaken. This book accurately predicted the disasters that socialism would cause in the 20th century, and those disasters are going to happen again if we try and take that path again. Eugene Richter was right then, and he is right now. And if we don't learn from our mistakes in history, we are doomed to repeat them. If you read this book, you'll know just how severe things can go south. Despite the fact that it's a work of fiction, Eugene was a prophet. He really predicted what was to occur, and if we're not careful, it'll occur again. So what you got to do is you got to read this book and realize that the answer is not socialism. The answer is capitalism. The answer is classical liberalism. Classical liberalism. That's a tongue twister. The answer is individual autonomy and profits and private property rights.